Our speaker today, or our interviewee today, is Carl Downen. Carl, why don't you spell your name, give the full name.
My name is Carl W. Downen, D-O-W-N-E-N, and we live here in Crawfordsville, 1309 East Main Street.
And what was your date of birth?
I was born February the 7th, 1916.
And where were you born?
I was born at Sullivan, Indiana, which is south of Terrell.
Okay.
Born on a farm.
And who were your parents?
My parents were Ethel and Cyril Downen.
Were they of what extraction were they?
Well, they were mixed English and German.
Okay. It's always been interesting. A good many of these people that we've interviewed have been of German extraction. And where did you go to school?
I went to school at Sullivan. Actually, I went to a country school 3 years, and then I rode a horse-drawn school bus for 1 year to a little town of High Mirror, and then we had school buses, and went to Sullivan the rest of my school years.
They were, you had still had horse-drawn school buses? No?
Yes. Walked to a country school 3 years, which was about 1.5 miles. And then we rode a horse-drawn school bus 4 miles for 1 year, and then a school bus to Sullivan after that.
How did you happen to come to Crawfordsville?
Well, I was living in Ohio, and I bought a half interest in B&D Lumber Company in Crawfordsville, and came to Crawfordsville.
So that it was after the war that you came?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I came here in
1954.
1954.
And what, you got out of high school, and what did you do then?
I went to Purdue University for 4 years, and was out of school 1 year after high school.
Now what kind of a course?
Took a general agricultural course. And when I got out of college, then I spent about 15 years as a traveling salesman for an agricultural feed company before I came to Crawfordsville.
Okay. And all right, tell us about your entry into the service. How did you happen? Where were you inducted, and where did you leave from?
Well, we left from. I left the United States for overseas service.
Well, where did you leave from the States? I mean, tell us about your entry.
I went to
induction and so
Fort Hays, Columbus, Ohio, for induction. Was sent to Camp McCain or Camp Custer, Michigan, for basic training, and as a military police, and then
do you have any understanding of why they happened to put you in the military?
Had none whatsoever.
Okay.
I had no idea that. I suppose that they needed people at that time, and so that's where I went. But and we made after Camp Custer, well, after basic, we made one trip to Boston, Massachusetts. We picked up a trainload of German prisoners of war. Took them to Trinidad, Colorado, and then we came back to Camp Custer.
Well, now, this was after the war. Then it had been underway for some time.
Yes.
What was your date of induction into the service?
March the 24th of 1993.
And but you went through from Lafayette and went through Indianapolis and then to Columbus for induction. Okay.
Right.
Now, Camp Custer, as I understand it, wasn't that the training for black, were there Negro troops there?
It wasn't at that time. I think at that time all of it was, well, no, I don't know where it all was or not, but but there was quite a large area that was being trained for military police duty.
All right. What type of training did you get there at?
Well, you get basic Army training to get you in condition and show you how to handle a rifle and that type of thing.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about your, after you're through with your basic, what they do with you.
Well, we sent us to, after the basic and a trip to Trinidad, Colorado, we went to Camp McLean, Mississippi, as guards around the POW camp.
Okay.
And I was there several months, and then was transferred to the veterinary service there at Camp McLean, Mississippi.
Now that probably had something to do with Purdue.
I assume that it did, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, go ahead.
I was there several months, and then was sent overseas to Oran, North Africa.
When you were shipped out, tell us about your transportation over Oran.
We left Newport News, Virginia, on a Liberty ship, and we were part of a convoy that ended up in Oran, North Africa. It took us 13 days to get there, and during those 13 days, the German submarine fleet was very active, but there were no ships destroyed out of that convoy. But it did keep you awake a good percent of the time at night.
What was your rank? Or your private?
Me, I was a private first class, and was that until much later on.
Okay, and you remember your quarters in the Liberty ship?
Well, yes, you had a bunk down in the hold of the Liberty ship, which wasn't very comfortable. Most everybody down there was sick, so I spent the trip on the deck of the Liberty ship, and found a corner and took my duffel bag and stayed in the corner. Felt good all the way over there. But down below it was a pretty rough place to be.
You'd sleep right there on the
Yes.
deck of the ship,
Yes.
in the open air.
Yes.
Of course, this would have been in the summertime, so it wouldn't have been
Yes.
too bad. Okay. And where you landed at Oran, do you have any recollection of your arrival there?
Nothing particular except that I was sent immediately to a station hospital there, where I was supposed to have an assignment. But when I got there, the assignment had already been filled for some reason. And so this threw me in a replacement pool. And this is where you get in trouble when you get in a replacement pool.
That's when you go to the infantry.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I was in the veterinary service as part of the medical corps, so I was sent, I was still in the medical corps, and that meant frontline medic. And so eventually that's where I ended up, without any training in the medical field.
And did you, as a medic, were you assigned an M1 or
No.
you just
You had,
no arms?
right.
Okay.
You carried medical equipment to give aid to guys that have been shot. They're injured.
Okay, you were at Oran. Well, where did you go from Oran?
We went from Oran by train up to Algiers, which is north of Oran, up along the coast. And then from Algiers, we went by boat to Italy.
Okay,
And was down in the toe of Italy, way down in southern Italy. And was there for a period of time. And then from there, we left.
What was the name of that town, do you remember?
No, I don't remember. We were out, just out in the country there. No towns around of any kind.
Yeah.
And I don't remember the place where we landed in Italy.
Was it, was the fighting still going on in Italy at that time?
Yes, very definitely. The farther north, fighting was very, very severe. And we thought at that time that that's probably where we were going to end up. Farther up in Italy, and the fighting going on there.
At the time that you were, before you even started, the POWs were coming back then, and then you get over there, and the fighting is going on, and were you facing Italian soldiers or German soldiers?
I wasn't on the front line.
Yeah, but I mean,
they were facing German soldiers in Italy at that time.
So that the Italians had already quit by that time, you think?
I don't really know.
Uh-huh.
But I know that Anzio Beachhead, for example,
Yeah.
was in full swing at
Now,
that
were
time.
you at Anzio?
No, I was not at Anzio, no. But these were Germans that they were fighting in that area at that time.
Yeah. I'm kind of interested because my brother was a medic at Anzio.
Okay, he was having a pretty tough go at then.
Yeah, that was rough going.
Yes.
Okay, we'll go ahead and tell more about your...
From Italy, okay, we left Italy on an LST, which is a flat bottom boat that they were hauling supplies from Italy to southern France. And we left Italy and were in Sicily then a short period of time, I'd say a couple of days. And then went on into southern France, landed in the Riviera in southern France. And let's see here what this date was. Well, September the 10th of 1944, I landed in the French Riviera in France. And then we moved up through France by stages. We would move up and be in an area for a short time, and then we would move on up again until along here in October the 13th. I was in combat, and I think that was the first rest period that we had. It was October the 13th. We came back from the front line and we're back in an ad rest area for a short period of time. And this was up in the Ardennes forest, and farther up in France. And fighting was very heavy in that area. We were suffering very, very heavy casualties at that time. And we were back in combat after that rest period until December the 2nd is the day that I was taken prisoner by the Germans. And,
well, now, tell us about your job as a medic. Do you remember, go into specifics on it. When you're a medic, do you have a stretcher you carrying with you, or what do you do?
As a medic, I was with, we were short of medics, and so I was working entirely on my own. If a man in our company was wounded, I went to him and did whatever I could to.
What company would this be?
This was This was part of the 45th Division. I believe the 10th Regiment of the 45th Division. And this was an infantry regiment on the front line.
And you were attached to that as the medical
Yes.
section of the infantry,
Yes.
of that division. Okay.
But if you had a man injured on the front line, you went to him and patched him up and got him back away from the front line as quick as you could.
What'd you do? Put him over your shoulder or what?
Depending on the injury of the man.
Okay.
If he was not injured critically, you patched him up and helped him get back from the front if he was shot through the arm or something like that. And if he was critically injured, then you did what you could for him, and then got called back for stretcher bearers to come up and get him and get him back from the
Were
front
the
line.
stretcher bearers a separate group for?
Yes, they were, at that time, they were separated from me because we were very short of such people.
Okay. Well, now, were you, did you carry tourniquets or what did you have? What
I
equipment?
carried tourniquets and other medical supplies for bandages and things like that to give temporary relief to.
Well, how do you carry these? You have a knapsack or something that you pack all that stuff in and?
Yes, you had two cases you carried.
Okay.
And carried with you at all times.
Uh-huh. And what did did you have any medicines?
No, we did not carry medicines. We carried we could give the man a shot to relieve pain, and that's all the medicine that we
Okay.
carried. Our main effort was to stop bleeding and stabilize the man enough to get him back.
Did you have to handle any amputation?
No. Well, if a man lost a leg, for example, or an arm, you merely stopped the bleeding and covered the wound, and then got him back to where he could be gotten to a field hospital.
Well, how, for instance, say a guy has got a leg severed. What do you do?
Yes, you put a tourniquet around your leg up here.
Okay.
And stop the bleeding, and then cover the stump where the leg was on.
And pretty bloody work then.
Yes.
And
But the main concern is to get the bleeding stopped, so the man.
yeah. Well, what about sanitation? How'd you handle that?
Well, you didn't have many sanitation facilities with you other than being able to cover the wound and keep out any
Infection.
Yes.
Were
But
you?
you didn't expect that type of a wound. You didn't expect this man to be too far from a field hospital, so that in a matter of a very short period of time, you would get him back to where to be taken care of.
Did you have sulfonylurea or what did you have?
No, we didn't have that. No. The only thing I had was a shot that I could give him to ease the pain, and but other than covering the wound, I didn't have anything for that. But we had stretcher bearers that we could call to come up and get that man.
How close were you to where the bullets were flying?
I was right with the bullets.
Yeah.
You were right on the front line with the fellows that were shooting and being shot at.
Well, when a medic would do, how were you identified? Did you have a Red Cross on your?
You had Red Cross on your arms. You had 4 Red Crosses on a steel helmet that you wore. But you still got shot. The reason there was such a shortage of medics, the mortality is very high in medics, and so I wasn't on the front line that long. I was there 6 weeks or so, and I was taken prisoner, and they had to get somebody up to replace me then.
Well, how many of they did? Were you present at any time when? I'm sure it must have been when someone would die, right? In your presence?
Yes.
How often did that happen?
Very, very regularly. A lot of companies, for example, had in a relatively short period of time would have maybe 40% casualty. Those wouldn't all be killed, but there would be a number of them who would be killed right on the front line.
How many instances, for example, would you say that you were present when someone died right with you?
I don't have a number in mind, but this wasn't unusual at all. This happened regularly.
Yeah.
Sometimes it could happen several times in one day's time.
Did you have any close friends of yours who were killed right in your presence?
At this time, I didn't have any very close friends because I had moved up and was with this company only 6 weeks, for example. And a lot of the fellows that I knew was with were killed. And many of them were injured and wounded and had to be taken back.
Let's go on. What about some of the other types of injuries that you saw? This is pretty bloody stuff, but you're about the first one that we've interviewed who's been right close to the.
You had a lot of fellows that were shot and wounded, but not critically. I mean, you had time to stop the bleeding and give them a shot for pain, and then get them moved back from the front, or get them into a relatively safe place where they could be taken care of. And this is what was happening when I was taken prisoner. This company had pushed out on actually farther than they should have been out, and I had these wounded fellows in a basement for protection, and they weren't the critically wounded fellows. They were fellows that could be there a while without any great danger to their health. And
when these fellows were wounded, if they weren't critically wounded, were they returned immediately to service?
No. They would not have been returned to service at that time.
But if it were, for instance, a superficial bullet wound and taken care of, would they return that kind of person to service immediately?
Some of them were returned, but I wasn't there when they were returned. But if a fellow had a superficial wound, he would be treated and maybe sent back to a rest camp for a few days, and then returned back to his company.
Well, Carl, it interests me. What did you do? You must have needed a lot of water. What would you do for instance, when you've got a lot of blood being spilled? You've got to have water and cloths and so on.
We didn't treat that. We didn't wash that wound. We covered that wound so that it could not get any more infection from the ground or anything surrounding it. But we did not wash that wound and clean it out. We were interested in getting that man back from the front where he could be taken care of.
Okay. All right.
Actually, the front line medic is is an emergency man that treats this man enough that you can get him out of there if he lost a leg, for example. You stop the bleeding and cover the wound, and you want him out of there just as quick as he can be gotten out.
Okay. Okay, well, how far, you say that at a certain point here, then you were taken prisoners, I understand it.
Yes.
How did that happen?
Well, I had this group of men, these injured men in the basement that I was working out one at a time, taking them back. I had taking a man down a little creek through the town to get back to where our forces were. And
now, where are we now? Are we in Italy, or are we up into France?
We're still in France at this point.
Okay.
And I was taking this particular, which was a lieutenant, I was taking down this creek to get back to where our forces were. And
how were you taking him?
I was walking him. He had a bullet through his thigh, and I was walking him down this creek because it was a little lower than the surrounding buildings and so forth. And I was walking him down this creek to get back to our forces, and I was cut off by a German up here there was a walkway across this creek that I hadn't noticed from one building to the other, and there was a German soldier that had his rifle on us, and we had to stop and were taken prisoner.
And you were, did you have this fellow, your wounded man, and I said, how, this German is, of course, I suppose he says halt or something like that?
Yes.
And what happened then?
Well, then, of course, there were other Germans that he was with. He wasn't by himself, but they came to in this little stream where we were, and this man was walking. He had an arm around my neck, and I was so helping support him to get him out of there. And we merely, instead of going to our forces, we went to his hospital, and then we went back. I went back and worked at getting the other fellows out of the basement, and actually eventually had a German medic helping me get them up out of this basement and get them out of there. Between the two of us, we got, some of them were so heavy that I couldn't get them out by myself, and so we got them out and got them into the German field hospital. And I was in the hospital with them. I was right in the operating room when several of them were operated on, and saw German soldiers being operated on at the same time, and our guys were getting the same treatment that they were getting.
Are these, I suppose, German doctors were like an operating room in America, I suppose?
Yes, same type of a field hospital that we had behind our front lines.
And did you have any trouble communicating?
Well, yes, you have trouble communicating. I couldn't speak any German, and a few of them could speak some English, so we could communicate. But I was in the hospital here for about 7 days with these wounded people until some more prisoners came by and they could send me away with them. I was sort of isolated there for several days, and was there in the hospital just waiting for other prisoners to come through.
What were you doing in the hospital?
Me?
Pardon?
Me? What was I doing?
Yeah.
I was doing nothing. I was visiting with the prisoners we had, and quite a few German civilians came by to look at the American prisoner and all this type of thing. Some of them weren't very happy with you and would spit at you, and I assumed curse me, but I didn't know
Oh.
Didn't understand their English, their German.
Well, where were you kept, in a house or where?
No, I was just in the operating area, in the operating
In the
tent.
hospital?
Yes.
What kind of a hospital was it?
It was just a tent affair,
Okay.
a large tent that was set up. Their actual operating room was in a house that they'd taken over. But the wounded were all in a big tent that had been set up there.
Uh-huh. It was, by this time, it was still warm, I assume, was it?
Well, it was December, so it wasn't that warm.
Mm-hmm.
It was in fact,
Oh, in December?
yeah, this is December.
Okay. And, okay, what happened then?
Well, from the hospital, I was put with 15 or 16 other prisoners of war, and we walked for 3 days back from the front. We were guarded by elderly German soldiers,
Mm-hmm.
and didn't travel very fast because they couldn't walk very fast. But after 3 days, we were to a railroad station in a town, and I don't remember what that town was, but we were put on a train then and sent back to a prisoner of war processing area where we were then sent to a regular prison camp.
What about was it cold? I mean, you walked for 3 days, you say?
Yes.
And just plodding along, what kind of a terrain was it?
Well, we were walking on roads, gravel roads or blacktop roads. And it was cold at this time, yes.
What clothing did you have? Did you have heavy?
I had fairly good clothing on. I had on long john underwear, and I had on wool pants and a couple of 3 long john undershirts that were warm, and had on some fatigues over my wool pants, and then had a warm waterproof jacket. So I was fairly warm. Some of the guys were not dressed as warm as I was.
What about frostbite? Have any trouble with that?
Well, not walking we did, but from this collecting station for POWs, we were put in a boxcar, and we were in that boxcar 4 nights and 5 days without food or water, and the temperature here was down below 0 at this time, and this was the hardest part of the POW. Being a prisoner was just 4 nights and 5 days. We were strafed by our own planes. Guys were killed and wounded in the boxcars, and we had guys that froze their feet and their hands in the boxcars. I was fortunate I didn't freeze. I found out that if you go to sleep standing up, you don't fall down. Your knees buckle, and before you hit the ground, you catch yourself, you wake up. And so during the 4 days and 5 nights, or 5 nights and 4 days, I stood and got exercise by going to sleep and catching yourself and bring yourself back up. And several of us did this, and we survived without frozen feet and frozen hands by doing this. But
do you have mittens? Do you have mittens?
I don't know where they're. I probably did have, but I don't know. But it was a way of keeping yourself going.
Where do you know where this train ride you had, where it was, from where to where?
I don't know where it was from. We ended up at Muhlenberg, which is Stalag IV B.
Uh-huh.
This is a little town of Muhlenberg between Leipzig and Dresden.
Uh-huh.
And but you don't travel very fast on a German train because of strafing and bombing railroad tracks and
Uh-huh.
and this type of thing. You spend more time sitting still than you do moving. So I'm not sure how far we went in the 4 nights and 5 days.
Uh-huh. Going back to when they had you walking at night, what would you do? How would you?
We would be in a farmer's barn or something like that.
Oh. They would, I suppose the Germans would just let you, take you into a house or a
No.
barn or something like that.
We would get into a barn.
Oh.
There weren't in any German houses.
Yeah.
And I don't think in that time that we had any food. I think we got water, but I don't think that we got any food during those 3 days that we walked.
Mhm. Did you think you eventually got food though, is that?
Well, you never got much food.
Uh-huh.
And the German civilians at that time were very short of food also.
Uh-huh.
But our food consisted of a slice of black bread about 2.5 inches wide.
Mhm.
And this was our daily food under the Germans. Once in a while you got maybe once a week you got a little soup made out of turnips. I always thought they were using sugar beets, but at least it was hot.
Mhm.
And we occasionally got some Red Cross parcels, but not very many because the German transportation system was in very sad shape at that time. They were being bombed and strafed, and there's just not too much moving. But when we did get Red Cross parcels, they were quite a help to getting.
How would they reach you with those Red Cross parcels? Did they send to the Germans and they got them to you?
They were sent. They had to come through Germany.
Uh-huh.
A lot of them, as I understand it, came through Switzerland
Uh-huh.
into Germany. But they came by, and I think I'm correct in saying that they were shipped. A lot of them were shipped by a truck, by a Red Cross truck, through Germany to distribution points, and then from those distribution points they were sent out to prisoner of war camps.
Now, when you speak of a Red Cross parcel, was that something from your own home, or was that something that just the Red Cross made up in parcels for you?
That was strictly from the Red Cross.
Yeah.
Although my wife sent parcels after I was taken prisoner, none of those ever got through to the prison camps. But the Red Cross parcels came by ship, and I think and maybe elsewhere too, but came by ship and then by truck into Germany.
What about mail? Did you get any mail?
No.
No mail at all the while?
No. You could send, as soon as I was to this Stalag IV B, we could send a postcard to our family telling them that we were okay and that we were a prisoner of war, and that's all you could say. To say you could tell them anything more, where you were, how you got there, anything about it. But
now you're talking about Stalag, about the camp. What kind of a camp was this? What tent camp, I assume?
no, this was a quick thrown up barracks, or rough barracks, that each barracks would hold, I don't know, maybe 400 people. And in this Stalag, there were probably 25,000 Russians, for example. And there were about 120 British, and there were about 40 or 50 Americans. And but the British and the Americans were isolated from the Russians.
So you didn't see the treatment of the Russians?
We saw the treatment, but we were in a different, we couldn't get to, we could talk to them through the fence, but the Russians worked 7 days a week from the time it got light of the morning until, well, after dark at night. And
work, what do you mean? What kind of work?
they were working in some kind of a factory. And we didn't know what it was, but they were marched out every morning early and got back late at night. The Americans and the British did not work. We did not work in this camp at all.
What would you do with yourself if you weren't working?
Well, you talk to other prisoners of war. We had a stove in our camp or in our barracks, but didn't have any fuel. So each day we could send a work detail out to a woods, which was about 4 miles from this camp that we were in, and you could carry back wood on your back, whatever you could carry. So each day I went on this work detail because I got out of the camp and I got a little exercise and just felt better than if I was sitting in the prison camp. But
when they send you out on a detail, I suppose they send some German guards out with you?
They would send a German guard with you, yes. And this was only, from our barracks, there was only a half a dozen fellows went at a time. And so it was just a little group that went out.
The German guard would be probably an old guy that wasn't doing anything.
Yeah, he was maybe 60 years old or 65 years old.
With a gun?
Yeah, he had a gun, loaded gun. And
so you wouldn't run away?
Yeah.
You probably wouldn't know where to go if you did run away.
No, we wouldn't. We were better off than if you ran away, you'd get shot. And I might say that the last day that we were walking, we were in a railroad station this night, and they had a couple of German guards, and they had us back in a corner, and there was a lot of people milling around, and a guy walked right in among us, and he said he was with the underground, and if we wanted to get out, wanted to get away, he could get us out away from the railroad station out into the country. But it would take me about 3 days to get us to make arrangements to get us on back to the American lines again. And said we'd be on our own those 3 days, but and said it's up to you guys. If you want to go, you have to all go, or if you don't want to all go, you have to all stay. So we decided we better just stay. Because we knew if they caught us out on our own after we got away from there, why we'd all be shot. So.
Well, now who's this fellow from the underground? How do you know?
I have no idea who he was.
Was he a soldier?
No, he was a civilian. And but when we said we'd stay, why he just left in the crowd and was gone again.
Was he a Frenchman or a German or what was
All I
he?
know is he spoke English.
Oh.
That's all we knew about him.
He was not in the uniform?
No.
Oh. No. Okay.
But it was an interesting sidelight.
Yeah.
That's what was going on.
Well, now some point along the line here, you're going to get rescued. What happened? Or you're going to get freed by the Russians?
Well, yes. about May the 8th, we knew for a couple of days before this that the fighting was getting close, because we heard, the second day before this, we heard artillery shell being fired. And the day before, we heard small arms fire. So we knew that the Russians were moving closer. And then the morning of the 8th, we got up and went out, and there were no guards around the prison camp. They were gone. And in just a little while, then the Russian infantry came through and went on past us. But they did take the 25,000 Russians that were prisoners. They took them with them. And
25,000 Russians
were prisoner in this camp, yes.
Oh, that must have been an enormous camp for them.
Yes, it was quite large, yes. But we had talked to a few of the Russians could speak English, and they were hoping that the Americans or the British would release them. They didn't want to be released by their own people, because Russian soldiers are not to be taken prisoner. They're to fight to the death. And under their own people, their conditions are going to be worse than they were there in this German prison camp. They said they would probably all be sent to Siberia, to slave labor camps, because they are not to be taken prisoner. And so they were hoping that the Americans or the British would release them.
That didn't happen.
Didn't happen, no. But after the Russian army went through, then Buddy and I left the prison camp. And
now, who was your buddy?
well, this was I forget what the guy's name is, but he was a kid that I had bunked with there in the prison camp. And he and I went to this little town of Muhlenberg and picked up a bicycle, each of us. And there were no Germans. The Germans were gone. We rode back from the front lines all day, because we figured the Germans might push the Russians back, and we didn't want to get caught in that situation. So we rode back from the front lines, and we didn't see a German. We saw a Russian soldier, but didn't see a German. And so we holed up in a little German village, and there was no Germans there. There was a little farm village. There was lots of canned food to eat, canned meat and vegetables in the cellars, and a dairy herd that needed to be milked, and we had plenty of fresh milk. And we stayed here for, I don't know, several days, half a dozen days or so. And then the Russians came through and picked us all up and took us back to a German military school. And we were under Russian guard then, which didn't go over very well.
Russian guard?
Yeah.
Why were they guarding you?
Well, I don't know. That's what we wondered. So this buddy and I found a basement window that we could take out. So early in the morning, a dark part of the night, he and I left and went across country to a road where there was a lot of traffic, and hitched a ride on a Russian truck. And he was going in the direction that, the American and Russian lines had met at the Elbe River in the meantime. And so he was going in that direction, so we rode up with him, and when he got up close to the Elbe River, we got off and went down to the edge of the river, and the Americans were across the way, and they eventually saw us come over and picked us up. So that was our return to American lines.
Yeah. How did you find your treatment by the Germans? What, for instance, were they friendly or were they?
Well, during the time that I was in the German hospital and on the walking back, Germans were not friendly, but most of them were not, showed no particular antagonism.
Mm-hmm.
A few of them would throw rocks and so forth at you, but this, I guess, would be normal if you was getting your house blown down and all this kind of stuff, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And after we were released from the prison camp, there were very few Germans around, although after about 3 days or 4 days, the Germans began to come back to these little villages. And there were Germans in this town, this little village that we were staying in, and were not unfriendly at all. In fact, they asked us to come and live with them. 2 or 3 of them did, because they didn't think the Russians would bother them if there was an American soldier in their house, and so they weren't antagonistic at all. They welcomed us and would give us food or whatever they had that they could offer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what happened? The war was coming here. We're getting May 18th or May 8th of
May the 18th. We were taking, well, from the close to the Elbe River, we were taken back to an airstrip and flown back to Lucky Strike Camp, it was called, which was a place where they were bringing POWs as they were released and got back to American hands, and where they were rehabilitating the POWs, ex-POWs.
Oh.
And this was strictly a big hospital and a recreation area where they...
Where was Lucky Strike?
It was, I believe it was Reims, France. Right close to Reims, France. But of course there were thousands of released prisoners coming in there, and but you got a thorough doctor examination, and if you have any problems, they put you in a bed and take care of you. And the thing that I liked, you got steak 24 hours a day if you wanted. They had a kitchen that you could get any kind of food you wanted any time of the day. And of course, after being without food for a while, food sounded pretty good.
Did you lose any weight on that?
Yeah, I lost weight in prison camp. I don't know how much, but I would judge that I normally weighed 175 pounds, and I was probably down to 150 pounds. But I don't remember how much weight I lost. But before we got back, I had already started recovering, because the German food, even without experienced cooks, was pretty good. But I wasn't in the hospital too long.
You spoke of being flown somewhere. It put you on an airplane to flew you over from where to where?
Well, from the front line area back to this Lucky Strike camp.
Yeah.
And this was strictly a cargo plane that you just crawled in and they...
sit there or lie on the floor.
Yeah.
Or bucket seats or something.
Oh, there were no seats in it. It was just a cargo plane. Okay. And you weren't in the air too long getting back to this camp, but then we were flying from the camp back to Le Havre, France, when we started to come back to the States.
And you came back on, I suppose, on a Liberty ship?
Yeah.
Okay. Atmosphere was a lot a little different than,
Yeah, you didn't have as many worries as you had going the other way.
yeah.
But we were 11 days getting back from Havre-French to Newport News, Virginia.
Okay.
And I'm glad to get back there.
And you came back to Newport News, and were you at that time, did you have any fiance or anything back here that you were, any person to meet you there?
Well, I had a wife and a child back here.
Already there?
Yeah, and
Well,
they
I
didn't
didn't get into that then. When at the time that you were inducted into service, you were already married?
Yes, yeah. We had a 2 months old child when I was inducted.
Okay, who did you marry? A girl from Sullivan or?
No, I married a farm girl from Remington, Indiana.
Remington?
Which is north of Lafayette.
Yeah, I know where it is.
And I met her at Purdue.
And you had this child by, how old was the child when you left?
Well, the child was 2 months old. In fact, I had a 3 months deferment until she was born. And so I had moved, we were in Ohio, and I had moved Margaret and her back to Indiana, where she'd be close to family while I was gone.
What was her name?
Margaret's name?
Yeah, what was her maiden name?
Her name was Margaret Budde, B-U-D-D-E. And she's a German family. They lived farmed at Remington, Indiana.
Yeah, lots of Germans up in that area.
Oh, yeah. Lots of Germans in Illinois. Part of her family lived in Mount Effingham, Illinois.
Yeah.
But yeah, she was. We had a child.
When you got back to the States, how soon did you see her and your child?
Well,
what was it, a boy or girl?
The girl. As soon as I got back to the States, I called just as quick as you could get a phone.
Yeah.
But that took a little time, you know.
Yeah.
And I don't just remember how many days, but it wasn't but a few days until I was home with a furlough. And
the war was over then, wasn't it?
the war was over, yes. Yes. The Japanese war was still going on.
I know, they weren't talking about shipping you over to Japan.
Well, there was some talk to that effect, but by the time that I was home for 60 days and got back to camp again, I had enough points to get out to be discharged. So I was discharged then and sent home.
Yeah. And so you remember getting off at Newport News, and what happened? How'd you get back to where you took the train?
Came by train to Camp Atterbury.
Okay.
And Margaret picked me up there, and then when I was discharged, I came back to Camp Atterbury again, and she picked me up there.
So that, okay, since then, have you had any more children?
Yeah, we've had two other girls after that.
Have you?
Yeah. And we lost one daughter with cancer 8 years ago, and have a daughter living here at Crawfordsville, and have one that...
What's your daughter's name in Crawfordsville?
Janet Clements.
Clements?
Fred Clements is the son-in-law.
Okay.
And
Does she have children?
Now she has 3 boys. Yeah, one of them is out of Purdue and works in Indianapolis, and one of them's a senior in high school this year, and one of them's in the 3rd grade. So.
What about any other grandchildren?
Well, I have 5 other grandchildren. One of them's in South Carolina, and one's in Chicago, and the rest of them are in Quincy, Illinois. So we got a pretty good sized family.
Yeah. And what did you do after you got out of the service?
Well, I went back to the same thing I was doing before the war for several years, which was traveling salesman working for an agricultural feed company. And went back to Ohio, and eventually I bought half interest in B&D Lumber Company and came back to Crawfordsville.
Who was your partner at B&D?
Don Brenstad. And eventually then...
How did you meet him?
He was brother-in-law. He married a sister of mine, Doris Brandstetter was my sister.
Yeah.
And so eventually sold my interest in the lumber yard and bought the Crawfordsville Monument Company. And manufactured monuments.
Okay.
And I stayed there until I retired.
Okay. Well, why don't we call it quits here and see if we think of anything.
Okay.
Carl, during this recess here, you told us about this having a radio in the camp. How in the world did you manage to have a radio while you were in a prison camp?
Well, it was there when I came. And when I was...
You had no idea how it got there?
I never knew how it got there, but each day, each night, they put this little radio together and listened to the news.
They? Who do you mean they?
The
Was there
guys,
somebody in your camp that knew it was good at...
Yes, the guys. Some of the guys in our group there knew how to put the thing together, but they tear it completely apart. And for example, I carried a tube for I'll say a couple of weeks, and then somebody else carried it. But each evening they assembled this thing and listened to the news. And as soon as the news was over, they tore it down and passed it around, because if the Germans found it, you weren't going to have a radio.
Yeah.
And so this kept you up to date on the war news.
How long did this go on?
Well, it went on every night that I was in prison camp.
Well, couldn't they hear you listening to the thing, or?
I didn't hear it. There was a little enclosed place in this barracks that we were in, and they would turn it on in there very low, and all the guys in this barracks didn't hear it. But after it was over with, they got the news out to you.
Okay.
But it kept you informed on.
No, that you had somebody assigned to listen to it, and then they passed it along to you.
Yes. Yeah.
Where was the news coming from? BBC?
BBC mainly. But you knew where the forces were in general, and we knew that the Russians were moving our way, and I think I mentioned 2 days before the Russians got there, we heard artillery coming, and then for the day before we heard the small arms fire, so we knew that they were going to be there.
Another thing we talked about during recess was a prison camp, and the watchtowers like they'd have in a prison here in America.
Right.
Tall places where they could look at you.
Yes, they could watch you from where they were.
And the camp was what kind of a enclosure was it? Was it a big wide open field or what?
It was made at the edge of this little town of Muhlenberg, and it was just made out in a field. Had a wire fence around it with barbed wire on top of it, and there was quite a bit of room around the barracks in it.
Yeah. Was it in a forest or?
No, there were no trees or anything in it. It was spread out in a bare area.
Carl, did you, when you were there in Germany, did you see was there quite a bit of destruction?
Yes. Yes, there was destruction all over.
What describe that, if you would?
Well, there would be factories blowing down, blowing up. The rail system was crippled quite badly. And there would be, for example, there would be planes into our surrounding area almost daily bombing the railroads. This little town, we were in this town of Muhlenberg, there were 2 different railroads running through it. And they bombed that almost daily to keep it out of service.
But were there trains running?
They would be repaired, and there would be trains running on it.
Who'd repair them?
I don't know who repaired them, and it could have been part of the Russians who were in this prison camp that were working on that.
Yeah. These towns that you saw, were there houses destroyed and that sort of thing?
In towns like where there's a railroad going through, there would be destruction in that town. Now a lot of the little farm villages out where there was no railroad or highways running through, then that wouldn't be destroyed. But if there was a heavily used road, that road would be bombed, and sometimes there would be damage in the towns.
Yeah. What about, did you see any destroyed tanks or military equipment?
Yes. You saw this a lot of times along the railroads, where they would be bombed when they were being transported on the railroad.
I mean tanks and...
Yes. Other military equipment.
Yeah. Vehicles and that sort of thing shot up.
Yes.
Okay. Let's see if anything else we haven't covered.
And you mentioned that the Russians were actually slave labor as opposed to the other prisoners, so
yes,
they were sent to work in a factory or something.
The Russians worked very hard in factories, and probably some of this railroad and road repair was done by them.
Yeah.
But they worked much harder. Their conditions were much rougher than what we were under in prison camp.
Yeah. Did you come in contact with any of the Russians at all?
Very few of them. There was a few of them that spoke English, and we would go close to the fence and talk back and forth with them, but very few of them spoke English.
Yeah.
So there wasn't much communication.
Another question, was there anybody that you served with that you especially admired for what he did, or any leader that you had that you appreciated, or anybody that you had that did anything exceptional that you would have admired?
I wasn't, as I said, wasn't with anybody any great length of time.
Yeah.
But the guys up in combat, I have a pretty tough role all the time. And the leaders, the second lieutenants or the captains who were up there, the casualties are pretty high on them.
Yeah.
And your sergeant who takes over when a lieutenant is knocked out is the casualty on those men are very, very high. But I wasn't with them long enough to make very close contacts with them.
After the war was over, have you ever seen any of your buddies, or the fellows that you were with?
I haven't seen any of them. There was one boy in the prison camp that was from my hometown, Sullivan. I didn't know him. He went to school with my sister. But he died about 2 weeks after he got back home. Just didn't have anything wrong up to that point, but just died. And the family called and asked if I would come to the funeral. And I did go to the funeral. The mother wanted to talk about the conditions that he was under and so forth. But other than that, I didn't.
Yeah. You've never attended any reunions?
No, I've really didn't have much of an interest until here recently. But I think I might make some effort some of these days to get in contact with a few of the people that I was with.
Well,
but when you go up as a replacement and are not there very long, you don't get any real contact with people.
You weren't with as a replacement. You go in and you just fill in a slot.
Right.
Somebody's been shot up already.
Right.
Okay. Well, I think that's about all. Good to have your, I think it's a great job. Let's talk a little bit more about that boxcar that you were in. Was that, being strafed?
Well, we were in boxcars, and there was several boxcar loads of us. Our own planes were strafing us because the boxcars weren't marked as being, we didn't have a red cross on them, but we were strafed by our own planes, and several fellows were injured, and a few in each car were killed, and you couldn't do much about it. You couldn't get away from it.
Did you, I think you told that when you got off you had to help somebody off that had been hit?
Yeah, when we got off of the train, there were wounded guys in there, and we got those guys off, and it was about a mile to the camp from where we got off of the train. I carried a wounded fellow to the camp on my back, and some of the other fellows did the same thing. And some of the fellows were killed or still in the boxcar, and they were gotten out then. But
so they didn't stop at any particular point after they were strafed. They just continued on until they reached their destination.
Some of these trains were stopped, and we were stopped because the engines were knocked out also, and so we may sit on the siding for hours before they got another engine to pull us on.
But you couldn't do anything with the wounded until...
No, we were locked in there, and we didn't, from the time we were locked in, we didn't get out until we arrived at the prison camp. And this is the way the Jews were handled. They were sucked into these boxcars, and they didn't get out until their destination. This could have been much longer than.
Did you see any of that? Any of the?
We saw a few Jews that had their clothes marked and so forth when we were walking these 3 days.
Yeah.
But we did not see any of the camps where they were exterminated and so forth. No.
Well, how'd you know they were Jews? They had their clothing marked?
Yes, they had this.
Well, what were they do? Were they slave labor?
They were slave laborers. Yes.
Oh.
And but we weren't to any of the notorious labor camps.
Did you? And another thing that you mentioned, Carl, was on the front lines going up. You mentioned that you went up and got into the action there in front, and they couldn't understand why you would come up and some of the other guys wouldn't come up.
Well, maybe I was too green, but if that's where the injured were, that's where I felt that's where I needed to be. And so I was up there with the rest of them. And I was the only one that was up there actually during the time that I was on the front line. But there were always stretcher bearers back a short way so that when they were needed on the front line, they could get there in a few minutes.
We talked about that earlier about fate. How did it happen that you survived?
Most people on the front line wonder this same thing, because you have so many close calls that you get to thinking, boy, somebody's.
I think you mentioned that you got a pack shot off the back one time.
Yes, yeah, I lost a pack one time. Wasn't hurt other than a couple of scratches on my back, but these things make you wonder, how come not me when somebody else is getting killed or injured? And you still wonder, how come it was not me that somebody else had got shot?
Yeah. Okay, I guess that's about it.